Hello, my name is Kathy Lake. I'm the environmental specialist with the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. I am an engineer by training, civil engineer, environmental engineer. So I'm now thrown into communication in a lot of ways. That is not something that I was originally trained to do. But as we look at how wastewater treatment has changed over the years and where we're going with water and wastewater, it's becoming more and more important to a lot of our agencies, as with energy, to make sure that we can get the messages out that we need and that people can digest those messages. The Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District has a mission of protecting public health and the environment. We've been in existence since about 1929. We have a vision of enriching life through clean water and resource recovery. The 100 or so employees that we have at the district are very committed to this mission and vision. But historically, if we weren't in the news, if no one knew we existed, we were doing our job. The district is a special purpose government in the state. We serve kind of the greater Dane County urbanized area. The areas in orange are our customers. We have about 40 communities up to Dane, Morrisonville, DeForest, Verona, all the way over to Cottage Grove, and a lot of the sanitary districts just north of Stoughton and Oregon, and everything in between. So we serve about 350,000 people, about 180 square miles. And all of that wastewater, anything that goes down the drain, comes to our one wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant, the Nine Springs plant, is located about where Southtown Drive is, off the belt lines. And we have, from that wastewater treatment plant, we have two discharge locations. We pump about 92% of our flow to Badfish Creek, which is just east of the village of Oregon. And then the remaining about 3 million gallons every day goes to Badger Mill Creek in the village of city of Verona. Ooh, look at that, it's fancy now. Historically, when we wanted to treat more wastewater or remove different contaminants, we built. We were able to design, engineer, build plant expansions that would bring us into compliance with our Clean Water Act permits. So back in the 30s, they built this with horses, lots of people. Our plant has actually been in the same location since the 30s, and we're still using a lot of those buildings. This is what our plant looks like today. So every day we get at least 40 million gallons of wastewater. It goes through the plant, treated, and released to the environment. We recover resources. We recover clean water. About 40 million gallons a day of clean water are recovered every day. In Madison area, you'll hear from the water utilities in a moment, but we get our drinking water from the ground, from groundwater. We bring in that water. It gets treated. It gets released to streams. Those streams end up in the Mississippi River and ultimately in the Gulf of Mexico. So we do have a dedication to water conservation. This is our other effluent stream. That first one was Badgerfish Creek. This is Badger Mill Creek. In the 1930, when we started our new plant at Southtown Drive, we're already gathering methane gas from our digesters, and we're still doing that today. This article was in August 1929, and they had gathered gas off the digesters and were using it to fire a grill and have a hot dog and hamburger, or a hamburger roast at that point, just to test the concept as they were building the plant. But the district's been very committed to sustainability even since its inception. So today, as I mentioned, we gather about 30% of our energy, but we're still one of the largest energy users in the region. We also recover nutrients from the wastewater in the form of fertilizer, and we put about 40 million gallons every year of fertilizer in local farm fields. It's injected into those farm fields. Last year, we put another process to recover additional phosphorus from wastewater into these little pellets called Struvite. Which one's the pointer? Oh, well. So these little phosphorus pellets, if in the wastewater, if we have the right pH of the water, we can precipitate out almost like a concrete substance called Struvite. It would clog some of our pipes and pumps. But that Struvite is very, very high in phosphorus, and phosphorus is a nutrient that's needed for plant growth throughout the country. In our watershed, we have too much. But if we're able to take it out of the water, out of the solids, put it in these pellets. We have takeoff agreements where they take it out of the watershed and sell it to places where they need it. But there isn't in a way. So historically, we wash our hands, we flush our toilet, we think the water goes away. And it doesn't really go away. It ends up at the wastewater treatment plant where we clean it, we take out everything we can. Some constituents in the water are very compatible. So we have, our treatment plant is great at removing compatible pollutants. We're great at removing oxygen demand, nutrients. We can screen out solids. There's a lot of incompatible pollutants. I have this little handout in our, right now we're facing issues with things that are labeled as flushable, that may be flushable, but they don't actually get through our plant. So we end up spending a lot of energy, time, and effort to get, I've got some more of those, but those types of things out of our wastewater stream. So if anything other than what comes out of our body, water, or toilet paper go into the wastewater, we end up having to screen it out, put it in a dumpster, and send it to the landfill. And then there's also those constituents that we can't remove. One of the ones we've been dealing a lot with is chloride. So salt dissolves in water. The only way we can get that out of water is to put a reverse osmosis type system, filtration system on. Very, very high energy, very high operating cost. And for all intents and purposes, we really can't remove that. So well, I'll get into that. Mercury is another one. We have a limit in the Clean Water Act of 1.3 parts per trillion. So part per trillion is about 1 square mile in the state of Indiana. So that's our limit. So if you think of all the 360,000 people and the industries connected, we have a limit of 1.3 parts per trillion. If somebody puts something with mercury in the wastewater, we could exceed our discharge limit. So we've been working a lot on outreach on making sure that people are aware that mercury shouldn't come into the wastewater stream. Also not into the landfills. We need to make sure that all the mercury-containing devices are going where they're supposed to. When we were working on our mercury reduction program, we found that the largest source of mercury was actually dental amalgam. And it wasn't the whole teeth. The whole teeth were getting disposed of properly, but when they were grinding them out, just the little dust of the teeth was the largest source of mercury. So we worked with the dental clinics to put in amalgam separators. And when we did that, we were able to see about a 50% reduction in our influent mercury. So this is our pollution prevention source reduction. If we can find out how to get the right message to the right people, we can really make a difference in the water quality. We can save money, we can save energy, and we can improve our environment. We have right now pharmaceuticals is a big one. A lot of the pharmaceuticals aren't removed by wastewater treatment processes, and they get passed right through. We've worked very hard with MedDrop and other organizations so that in our region, most people can get rid of unused medication very easily. Almost all the police stations will take it. No questions asked. There's a drop box. Never, ever flush any pharmaceuticals. But about 50% of what we get actually is what comes through our bodies. So we're working at this point on making sure there's no intentional discharges of pharmaceuticals. But as we look at wastewater in the future, we're also looking at should we be investing more in public health. There's a lot of the anxiety drugs we see, antidepressants, caffeine, other things that are coming right through the plant. Is it more of a public health aspect we should be working on, or the efficacy rates of the pharmaceuticals are only sometimes 20 to 50%. So if the drugs that people are taking, most of it is just getting wasted, should that be a focused effort for wastewater? As I mentioned before, salt is a really big problem for us. We have a permit limit for how much chloride, the NaCl, so the chloride portion, we can discharge, and that's because it's a threat to the freshwater environment. We have fresh water here. We don't have salt water, but the more chloride we add to the water, the more toxic it is to the low end of the food chain. So we have two sources. We have a lot of sources of salt in the wastewater. The largest for us is water softener salt. So every bag of salt you put in your water softener ends up leaving your house, going to the wastewater treatment plant, passing through, and ending up in a stream. So every 40-pound bag you put in ends up in a local stream. So we've been working with the water quality professionals, those who are installing water softeners, to make sure that they're putting the highest efficiency softeners in. We do need to figure out how to get that message out to homeowners to make sure that they've got the highest efficiency equipment. The softener is usually the forgotten appliance. People will put the highest end countertops and everything else in, but they'll put the cheapest water softener. So as far as we message, we need to make sure that we're getting those types of messages out, that this really is an important ingredient in our environment. At the wastewater treatment plant, we have a wastewater-only sewer system. So what comes to us should be from the drains, from the sinks, but occasionally when there's large rain events, we'll have storm water that will infiltrate in. It'll come in through cracks in the system or holes in the manholes. In the winter, that'll bring us some road salt. So we see large spikes of salt in the winter. Any salt that doesn't come to us ends up in the local waterways anyways. So it ends up in your rivers, lakes, streams. It ends up in the groundwater. It ends up in our drinking water. So we've been working. So if it doesn't end up at the wastewater plant, it ends up either in the groundwater resources. The dots here show historic data from the Madison Water Utility. And the larger the dot, the more chloride there is in their water. So in 1995, not as many impacted wells. 2010, many more. These concentrations are continuing to increase. This graph was developed by Madison-Dane County Public Health, showing the Madison lakes. From when road salt started getting applied in our watershed to now, we have from 3 to 5 milligram per liter baseline in our Madison lakes, up to the smaller lakes up in 120 milligram per liter or higher. And that's road salt. That's road salt coming into our water. But yet we have this perception, and the upper one is some of the creeks in the area and showing the spikes in the winter. It doesn't flush out. It stays in these systems. But this message has also been, there's a lot of experts that have been working on this from a lot of different agencies, but we haven't been able to get that message out. But if we at the wastewater plant have to treat for chloride to try to remove it just from the wastewater, it doesn't take care of the groundwater, the surface water resources. We had a consultant do a study for us, and just for our one wastewater plant, we were looking at present value costs of up to $2.5 billion for our little region to treat for to remove chloride from the water, because we'd have these huge microfiltration plants. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of people that are interested in salt reduction and road salt reduction. We've got, it's very hard to see here, but the Dane County Office of Lakes and Watershed, the different municipalities, the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District, the water utilities, public health, UW, the Madison Area Stormwater Partnership. We're all very interested in this, and people have been doing a lot of research. Last year, we pulled together and developed an education campaign called WISaltWise. And we also funded a lot of training for applicators, both municipal applicators and private applicators. This is what WISaltWise looks like if you go to the website. What we did was we focused on 5 main audiences, and that was homeowners, motorists, municipal officials, EMS and public works, who did I forget? Applicators. So looking at trying to focus those messages on these audiences. But right now, this whole consortium is working on how do we roll this out to get the most information in the hands of those that can make the decisions to really use the right amount of salt versus too much salt, because historically people have thought it's a cheap safety alternative. It's a very cheap investment just to throw it out there. So as I mentioned before, we have a lot of phosphorus in this watershed. Phosphorus is in a lot of our water is a controlling nutrient for algae growth. So if there's too much phosphorus that goes into a waterway, we get too much algae, and nobody wants that. So we've been working very hard to reduce phosphorus. At the wastewater plant, historically our influent concentration was about 9 milligrams per liter, and then there was a ban on phosphorus in detergents. And that cut our influent down to about 5.7. So this is source reduction pollution prevention. By making that change in just the ingredients in detergents, half of the phosphorus that came to us was gone. From there, our plant is great at removing phosphorus. We remove about 95% of that phosphorus before it leaves. So the phosphorus leaving our plant right now is about 0.25 milligrams per liter. But in order to bring our watershed into compliance with the water quality criteria, we would need to get that effluent down to 0.075. So another about 90% reduction on top of that. And we also had a consultant study what that would take to treat at our plant. And that would take hundreds of millions of dollars and a lot of energy, because we'd also be in a filtration mode to actually be able to get that fine amount of phosphorus out of the wastewater. So we continue to optimize that process. But in addition to that, we've looked at the entire watershed. And if we look at where the wastewater treatment plant sits, we're in the greater Yahara watershed. We have the Madison chain of lakes, who's also very interested in phosphorus. Any improvements we do at the plant help the Rock River, help the Yahara River down in Rock County and then the Rock River down to the Mississippi. But it does nothing for the Madison chain of lakes because we discharge about 5 to 10 miles below the Madison chain of lakes. So if we look at that entire watershed, there's a lot of other sources of phosphorus within the watershed. And actually, about half of the sources of phosphorus are regulated under permits. So there's wastewater treatment plants, there's stormwater dischargers. The other half are non-point sources of phosphorus, and that would be farmers and other areas that have phosphorus discharges to the water. So if we just spent $100 million to improve our, reduce our phosphorus down from 0.22 to 0.075, we would chop off maybe about this much of the pie, but we wouldn't improve the entire watershed. So we pulled a group of all the permitted entities together that are in the entire watershed, and we're working on a project called Yahara WINS, which is the Yahara Water Treatment Network. And what we're doing is we're pooling resources to invest in the low-cost mix of phosphorus-reducing practices throughout the entire watershed, such that the entire water quality in the watershed will meet water quality standards. So we're looking at all sources of phosphorus, because historically, the Clean Water Act has done amazing things. So if you look at where we were in the 70s and where we are now, it's done amazing things. But if we don't look at that other half of the pie, and we don't look at all the sources, we're never going to achieve water quality criteria in our waterways. So we have the cities, villages, towns. We have a lot of other agencies that are participating. Agencies that don't have permits, like the San County Foundation, actually contribute about $250,000 towards the water quality monitoring piece. So if we look to achieve our permit compliance through what we call watershed adaptive management, we need to be able to prove that we're making progress, and that's through both modeling and monitoring. So we also have a lot of interested parties who are helping us along the way. And there's a website if you want to learn more at our madsewer.org. So the reasons to implement watershed solutions, pollution prevention, there's a lot of cost savings. Everything's on the table. We can put resources where we really can improve water quality. Collaborative, we can solve tough problems by bringing all types of people and organizations together. We can find common ground and build stronger communities. And it's effective. By working together, we can comply with our permits. We can improve water quality. But there's always a but. Ooh, that doesn't look good. But working together brings a lot of challenges. As I mentioned in the beginning, my background is in environmental engineering. And right now, I'm working on water quality with farmers, homeowners, other point source dischargers, municipalities, stormwater dischargers, agencies, environmental advocates, conservationists. We need to be able to get that information in ways that people can digest it, people can understand it, and our messages can actually move forward. So, success in pollution prevention, source reduction, improving our water quality, saving energy, conserving water, requires new tools. So currently we have a lot of tours. I give a lot of tours of the wastewater plant. We have a website. We have handouts. We do group outreach to interested groups. We have a lot of volunteers that want to help us through the different watershed organizations, but this is where we can use input from groups like yours that really understand the communication piece much better than we do. So with that, I think that's all I have.
So I think this will actually segue really well with what Kathy was just talking about. I'm Amy Robb with the Madison Water Utility. Just a little bit about me. I've been with the water utility for 6 years. I'm currently an outreach specialist for the Madison Water Utility. I've been in that role for a little over a year now. And so a little bit about myself. I was born in Honduras, so my first memories are of a place where the water was not safe to drink and was not always reliably present. And then I grew up in West Texas, which had some water scarcity issues. Came to Wisconsin, which is a very water-rich state, as we all know. But that's just a little bit about my background as it relates to water. The Madison Water Utility was started in 1882. We actually have this really fascinating mini documentary out on YouTube about the history of the water utility. It's totally fascinating. It kind of started out, there was a UW undergrad student who did some water quality studies of people's private wells and found most of them to be contaminated. People would drill a shallow private well right next to their septic system a lot of times, and didn't really at that time have an understanding of waterborne diseases and illnesses, and just thought that kind of the natural filtration of the water coming out of their wells would keep them safe. And so the water utility was founded because of combined concerns with water quality and also the need for fire protection in Madison. There were a lot of firms interested in building a waterworks for Madison, but there was a council member who stepped up and said, no, this needs to be a publicly owned thing. Water's very important, and was kind of a really fought to keep the water utility as a publicly owned municipal entity, and we still are, a part of the city of Madison and publicly owned now. So today, one of our primary charges is to supply high-quality water for drinking. All of our water is fit for consumption. We also have to supply sufficient water at all of our hydrants for fire protection. That's something that people don't typically think about, the water utility's charge being. So we have to build our system with fire protection in mind, so that at the very height of summer, when people are watering and all that kind of stuff, you don't always know when the fire is going to happen. We have to have all these contingencies in place if a well is down, that kind of thing, where no matter what, if a fire hydrant, if a fire truck pulls up to a hydrant, they can get enough water at that hydrant to put out a fire. So that picture there is of a major fire on the east side last summer, which was during our peak season pumping-wise. As you can imagine, just millions of gallons of water needed a day to fight a fire. So that's one of our big charges at the water utility. Just kind of the way that we work, we're a groundwater system, as was mentioned. We have 22 wells throughout the city. Most of our wells, we pump the water out of the ground. We add fluoride and chlorine to the water. It goes into storage in a reservoir. Some of them are towers above the ground. Some of them are on the ground. There's a few that are below the ground. And then it goes through our distribution system out to people's homes. We have 2 wells that have iron and manganese filters currently, and we have 1 well that has a air stripper to remove VOC, basically a man-made contaminant that's present at that well. So that's kind of how our system works. And then just kind of an idea, this is there's a lot going on in this picture, but this is the water cycle. I put this up here just because to give a sense of how Madison works. So we're getting our water from the groundwater. So, infiltration is something we care a lot about at the water utility. Madison is a little unique because, we kind of are disrupting the cycle a little bit, where we're pumping the water out of the ground, and our wastewater goes to MMSD and then is discharged downstream. So the water that, goes through our wastewater system is leaving the Madison area. So that's something, one of the major reasons we really need to care about conservation in Madison. According to our experts, we're in a sustainable position with pumping at our current rates in Madison. But as you know from what's happening in California and things like that, you can't really know for sure the future and what what rainfall patterns will be like, what population growth, and all those kinds of things will be like. So at the water utility, we really care a lot about, reducing our per person water usage and also maintaining our infiltration, maintaining green spaces within Madison, maintaining areas where, water can still continue to go down and recharge our aquifer all throughout Madison, because these wells are all over the city. There's not just one spot. And so those are a couple of things that we really care about at the water utility. And as you can see in this picture too, there's a lot of things that happen on the surface that can impact our groundwater. Road salt being one of them that was already touched on, but also farming, all kinds of industrial uses and things like that. So just kind of getting into our conservation goals. So basically, in Madison, as our population is increasing, our per person water usage needs to decrease in order to be able to remain sustainable. I can't remember exactly what year it was that we had our conservation goal, but this goal was set to reduce water usage 20% by 2020, which would be about 58 gallons per person per day. Right now, we're at about, our average is down to like 61, I think, and so we're kind of getting toward that goal. And so in order to get to, the conservation thing, we're looking at, individual behaviors. And it's not just the conservation piece we care about. It's also our water quality, protecting our water quality, and, kind of developing an awareness and developing advocacy for, basically protecting our water here in Madison. This is actually really interesting to me. This is a graph. These blue bars are the population in Madison, and the green line is our pumpage every year. And as you can see, there's kind of this point where, it's going up, 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 up. But our pumpage is on a decreasing trend, even as the population is going up. And so you have to go back to, before 1970 to see, the same amount of pumpage as we had our last year. This is not just unique to Madison, this trend. As much as I'd like to say Madison is amazing and, woohoo, this is a, a national trend. And it's actually the primary reason, there's a lot of factors going into it. But the primary reason is some regulations that went into effect in the 90s about how much water fixtures can use, toilets primarily. So in the 90s, regulation was passed. You cannot buy a toilet today that uses more than 1.6 gallons per flush. And so this is, to me, an example of how, a very successful regulation. And, when that first rolled out, I don't know if you guys remember, it was a little dicey. Some of those first, 1.6 gallon per flush toilets were not good. But the industry adapted. They figured out how to make that work. And now basically even, as toilets fail, as things happen, as fixtures get replaced, this has been something that has led to a lot of conservation with no change in people's behavior, really. So this is a really good thing for us to see, and we'd like to just kind of continue to see this trend happening. So when we look at indoor water usages, as you can see, the toilet is the biggest user of water in a typical residential home, followed by laundry, showers, faucets. Leaks account for up to 10% or approximately 10% of water used in people's houses, and then the other is basically everything else. So, yeah, at the water utility, this is just indoor. Yeah. It's hard to know, for Madison, kind of like a national rule of thumb is kind of about 50-50 indoor and outdoor. I think Madison that's not really how it plays out because we have a lot of, we actually have a lot of rainfall here. But it is a significant, outdoor use is pretty significant still. we have six of our 22 wells only run in the summer months because the demand is higher. So obviously people are using water outdoors a significant amount in Madison. But yeah, when we look at zeroing in on reducing indoor use, the toilet, I think, is kind of the obvious place where we really want to see, we can get the most bang for our buck. We're also looking at leaks or that's just water that's not helping anybody, and it's wasted water. The average household loses 10,000 gallons a year to leaks, just kind of on average. So, and it can be, if you have a major leak that you don't know about, a silent toilet leak or something like that, it could be significantly more than that. When you're looking at outdoor usage, about half of water that's used outdoors is wasted water. It's water that you're overwatering, so it's just infiltrating down. It's evaporating out. Those kinds of things. It's not actually serving the purpose that you want to do. So these are kind of just some of the things that we look at the water utility as some of the low-hanging fruit, I guess, in terms of changing things. And so, kind of one of the first programs we rolled out was a toilet rebate program. So the Madison Water Utility gives people $100 if they replace a toilet with a toilet that's on the EPA's water sense list. Those use an average of 1.28 gallons per flush. That's been a very successful program. Since it's been in place, we just reached the over 1 billion gallon mark of how many gallons that have been saved in Madison through this program. And like I said, this is a program that people replace their toilet. It's there in that home for a very long time, and it's kind of this like passive conservation measure. But it's so significant, especially if it's a 1950s toilet that's using 5 to 7 gallons per flush. To go from that to a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet is a huge reduction in water use. And we've seen, people will send us pictures of their old pink toilets. Thank you so much for this rebate, because it's almost, the rebate is significant enough as well that you can almost, completely pay for your toilet through the rebate program. It's pretty much like almost getting a free toilet. And this is a program that we're looking to expand now at this point it's been just a residential program, and we've kind of at this point kind of reached a stasis with it, so we're looking at expanding it to certain commercial customers and nonprofits, restaurants, those kinds of things that have old toilets. And that's something we'll probably be rolling out sometime this summer. The other thing we looked at the water utility is when I first started, we were on a 6-month billing cycle. We were using this little water, we were using meter readers. We had this old read-o-matic unit affixed to the outside of the homes, and a meter reader would go up there to the home to read the meter. And they did that every 6 months. And so we were, being directed by the PSC, you need to bill more frequently. And also people had no idea how much water they're using at that point. If you're getting billed for 6 months at a time, it's really hard to know what your behaviors are for water. And then we were running into issues. This was just like such a perfect picture to me where people would have major issues and have no idea. So, this spigot had been running for I don't know how long, and there was no way to know necessarily if you weren't out there. We'd have, basically, when all the vacant homes and things like that in the winter, we'd call them flooded houses or frozen houses, where they'd have a pipe burst in the house and nobody's there, and nobody would know about it until the spring when everything's thawing out and you'd see water pouring out of the house. A neighbor would call. So, this is something we really needed to do something about at the water utility. So when we were looking at alternatives, we decided to go with an advanced metering infrastructure so that we could get some really good data about what water is being used. And then we also made a decision to put that in the hands of the customers. That's not something a lot of water utilities do yet. So we just rolled out in October a new piece on our website. We're calling it Every Drop Counts, where you can track your own monthly, daily, and even hourly water usage. We're the only water utility in the Midwest doing this, and there's not very many utilities in the country that are doing this. We're kind of out on the leading edge in terms of putting this kind of information in the hands of our customers. And so this is actually me looking at my water usage. So you can log on. You can see a daily breakdown of your water use. You can see an hourly breakdown. This is probably a water softener cycling or something like that at 1 a.m. And you can also compare year over year. There's a lot of tools. You can export it to a spreadsheet. There's a lot of things that you can do to track your usage. And so I've been able to kind of see my own habits and where I use the most water. And so this is something that is brand new. We're wanting to get this into the hands of our customers as much as we can so that they can just have an idea of how much water they're using and be aware of leaks and things before they happen. And so there's also, because we're one of the first utilities in the country, there's kind of some funky things that happen occasionally with it because the vendors are still kind of figuring out how to put these kinds of tools in the hands of customers in a way that they can understand. Our billing software, it's like people are just looking at like meter readings, and it's like a table of meter readings. And that's not something that is useful for customers to use. You need something, an interface like this. And so but yeah, as we can continue to refine this tool, as people can continue to use it and give us feedback, I think that this will be something that could be really powerful to leverage in the future. The other thing you can set up on this is you can set up high usage alerts. You can set up like, your own goals based on how many people are in your household, for how much water you want to use per day, get an alert when you go over that. You can set up an alert if you're gone to know if water's over a certain amount. There's a lot of tools available here. So this is something we're really, really excited about at the water utility. This is also information that we have on our end as well. So we've been able to run a report. At this point, I think it's like if there's continuous water usage over X amount of gallons per hour. So these cases where there's a flooded house, basically, or a pipe bursting, we've been able to we've caught hundreds of leaks since we rolled the system out on our side, where it's just, where if it's a really big situation like that, if there's no one there, we can shut water off at the street. If there is someone there, we can contact them and they can figure out what the issue is. And so, we don't really have a number exactly of how many gallons that saved, but it's been pretty tremendous. And the customers that have benefited from it have been really, really happy. The other thing we have going on right now is a conservation rate proposal, and we're looking at doing, kind of some tiers for residential rates, and then eliminating kind of this declining block, which is kind of like if you use over X amount of gallons, your price is lower per gallon of water. That's something that is kind of something the PSC has done for a long time. And that's something we're looking to get rid of, is this kind of price break for using more water. So that's currently with the PSC. It hasn't gone to public hearing yet, but we're thinking it'll be rolling out in the next few months. The other big effort that we've been undertaking at the water utility over the last few years is wellhead protection or source water protection, because besides protecting the quantity of our water, we also need to look at protecting the quality of our water in order to be a sustainable community. And a big part of that is this wellhead protection program. So this is one of our wells downtown, and there's a couple of components with that. One of them is basically figuring out all the potential sources historically and currently of contamination within our wellhead protection areas, so that if it's a current site, we can do some outreach to those businesses, whether it's an auto body shop or, a gas station or whatever, about, ways that they can protect our groundwater in their practices. The other component of it is future development. If there's a development planned within one of our wellhead protection areas, then we review that development in Madison to determine if, how it would impact our groundwater. There's certain kinds of things that are not allowed within our wellhead protection areas. There's certain kinds of things where it's just an opportunity for us to talk to the developer about things that they need to do in order to meet kind of this wellhead protection requirement, and then, yeah, it's just kind of something that we can do. The other component to our source water protection is public education. So we're rolling out in some of our kind of high visibility areas within wellhead protection areas. This is going to be a street sign that'll be there, just kind of helping people think about, that they live in, a protected area. I think if you're on the East Coast, you kind of know about some of like the watershed areas and things like that that are protected, their parks and things like that. That would be really nice, but in Madison, this is an urban environment, and so, our wellhead protection areas are right in the city. It's University Avenue. It's, all these places. I think right here we're pretty close to well 14. We're within that wellhead protection area for well 14. So that's something we've been working with at the utility as well, and that's kind of a new thing that Madison Water Utility is doing is this component of helping people think about, that where they live is, their source water is directly beneath their feet. Well, we're, in conjunction with the signs, we're rolling out some education on our website. So the road salt piece, road salt application, one of the things I was going to get to, too, is, if you have a private well or an old private well, abandoning that private well, fertilizers, pesticides are using. Right now with emerald ash borer, and people are trying to save their trees, looking at how you're applying those things, being smart about the way that you apply fertilizers and pesticides if you're choosing to use them, what kinds of products you're choosing to use, and then how you're using them so that that's not something that's just going to infiltrate right into the groundwater. So yeah, there's a lot there. But right now, kind of the salt and then, what you put on the ground goes into the groundwater kind of messaging. So does that answer your question? Okay. Of course, we can't put all that on a road sign. So our hope is kind of that this will be like a, and I don't even know if this is the final sign yet. We're still thinking about it. But this will pique people's curiosity, and they'll go to our website. So where it's like, oh, what's that? One of our biggest efforts that we've undertaken that's been hugely successful is private well abandonment. This is something that is like not on people's radar at all. This is an actual unabandoned, unused private well that was in Madison. It was basically this open hole down into the ground that was left on a lot. What we have in Madison, and probably in other communities outside of Madison, is there are pockets of the city where people's houses and cottages and things were built before there was a water supply there, and so they were on a private well. And then the water system comes in, and they hook up to city water, and that private well is just kind of hanging out there. And a new property owner might take over, and they've got a cistern in the basement, or they've got kind of this weird hand pump in their yard, or they've got, but they don't really know what it is, and they don't have any sense of what that is and what it does. So we rolled out a well abandonment reimbursement program at the water utility where, we're reimbursing people for part of the cost to have their well abandoned properly, and, when we inspect it and all that kind of stuff. And then we also have staff that does surveys in, looking at our wellhead protection area and areas that are likely to have private wells because of what we know about when city water came in. And they actually walk around in those neighborhoods and knock on doors and look around and try to find these private wells, like well investigators or something, Kevin hates it when I call it that. But, and that's been, before we were kind of looking at we were inspecting abandonments of about maybe 5 or 10 wells a year. When we started this, it was 40 wells one year, 50 wells another year. We've abandoned, supervised the abandonment of, over 100, maybe 200 at this point wells since we started this. And this is just kind of closing up these pathways into our aquifer where it's just, it's just scary to think about, and we need to look at that. So if any of you have a mysterious thing in your houses, talk to our water quality department if you have a hand pump or a cistern or something in the basement that you don't know what it is and you know you're on city water. Talk to our water quality department and we could help you out in figuring out if that's a well or not and help you get that abandoned and help you pay for it. So that's been a very successful program. And then Kathy already talked about this, but we're one of the partners for Wisconsin WISaltWise. This fall we sent all of our own staff to the training on road salt application because we actually have, at our facilities we've got sidewalks and parking lots and things where we, have to use road salt sometimes. And for people who do the applications on sidewalks at sites, for a long time it was kind of like, if someone slips on your sidewalk and sues us, like we're going to be looking at you, about that. Why was the sidewalk icy? And so I think that there is this tendency to apply a lot of salt so that no one slips and falls and sues the city or sues, you as a homeowner or sues the apartment building or whatever. And so teaching people, how much salt is the right amount of salt to use is something that, we sent our people to that and they thought it was great, and now we're looking at, how we can network about that and get people to think about how much salt they're using and get this information in the hands of the right people. So, and then, the education and outreach component at the water utility, this is a relatively new thing. Like I said, my position at the water utility is relatively new. We also have a new public information officer that I work with, and municipal publicly owned water utilities do not typically, they don't have a history of having public relations or marketing or outreach people like a lot of other organizations do, or like the bottled water industry and all these other kinds of places do. And so this is a new frontier for water utilities. And so we do we do tours similar to MMSD. We have partnerships with schools. We just did a partnership with the Childhood Obesity Prevention Collaborative and the YWCA and MSCR and all these different organizations to install bottle refilling stations in Madison schools. In a lot of Madison schools, kids don't have access necessarily to drinking water when they have lunch or throughout the day. And so looking at those kinds of things is something we're working on. We have our water wagon that we take out to outdoor events so that we can reduce the use of plastic water bottles at those events, and also, just kind of interface and connect with the community and help people feel the value of the water resources that we have here. And that's kind of our water wagon, our Drink Local campaign, all the events that we've done around Madison where we've been able to give people reusable water bottles and have the water wagon out there. Then finally, I talked a lot about what we're trying to encourage other people to do, but we're also looking at ourselves internally at the water utility, what we can do to promote water conservation internally. One of those is reducing water loss. We've been able to use the better data that we get through our meters to figure out areas of the city where we're losing water and send people to listen for leaks in the system and repair those. Looking at targeting our infrastructure, which water mains we're relining and replacing to reduce water that's lost. That's something where that's water that we're paying to pump. We're using energy to pump and treat, and then it's just, it's wasted energy at that point. So we're also, over the last several years, we've been, as a big user of water, we've been looking at ways to reduce the energy we use. We've had graduate students from UW doing energy saving studies, where as we're looking to replace, some of our well pumps with like variable speed drives, there's all kinds of different technologies that are out there. They're basically looking at where we can get the most energy savings for our dollars out of all these facilities that we run, all these different alternatives that are out there for the pumps we use, soft starts. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but it's a lot of possibilities. But some of them, it could be an investment that you don't see a lot of energy saving because of the way that we run the well. because of the other facilities and things like that. So they're looking at ways that we can really see the most energy savings for our ratepayer dollars. We also, when the facility that I work in was built over 10 years ago, we installed the first large-scale commercial gray water system there to capture the water that was used at our meter test benches, you know, where they have to test water meters, and it's water that's just running through the meter, and before it was just going into the sanitary sewer. So we installed a gray water system. It's been interesting. It's been an adventure, and we're constantly tweaking it and figuring out ways to make it work. But, you know, this is something we're really committed to at the water utility, to be able to build something that's an example to other businesses who are looking at similar situations. And then just our general facility upgrades for energy and water savings at all of our facilities throughout Madison. So those are some of the things that we're looking at as an organization, as ways that we can model good behaviors and also set an example and be able to better educate people going forward. So I don't know, that's a lot, but does anyone have any questions about anything that I just talked about?
So my presentation is a little bit shorter. I work for a small community, and we're kind of trying to get the ball rolling here. I had a little bit of envy during Amy Robb's presentation about all the things that the Madison Water Utility is doing. So you'll have to forgive me. We have 2 office staff members that work in our water utility department. So we don't have any outreach specialists. We don't have marketing people. We have our utility director, and we have our billing manager. I actually work for the planning department at the city. The reason that I'm here speaking to you about this today is because I staff our city's sustainability committee, which has been making recommendations for how to improve water conservation efforts in the city of Middleton. So a little bit of background on the city of Middleton. I hear a lot of misconceptions about what the city of Middleton is like from a land use standpoint, and I like to start my presentations by dispelling those myths as much as I can. The city of Middleton is the second most compact community in Dane County. We're a city of about 18,000 people. Almost 50% of our housing stock is in multi-unit structures, so apartments and condominiums. It's very similar to the percentage in the city of Madison. We have one of the first new urbanist neighborhoods in the Midwest, Middleton Hills, which is a neighborhood that's designed to be more pedestrian friendly, more walkable. Houses are set closer to the street. There's more of a mix of uses. We have commercial areas. We have all different types of residential areas within that neighborhood, and it's pretty central in the city as well. And also, we are a net provider of jobs to the region. So what that means is that our population swells during the day by about 8,600 people in 2010. 20% of our land in the city of Middleton is in permanent public open space. So if you look at the open space map on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you can see all of the areas that are yellow and green are areas that we've determined to put into permanent public open space. So they're parks, they're conservancy land. Our golf course is included in that as well. Several environmental corridors following our Pheasant Branch Creek, which is kind of the jewel of our city. We have very stringent stormwater management practices in place. So they're more strict than the county's standards, and the county is known for having very strict standards. So for new development, although it miffs a lot of developers when they come in and they want to do a project in the city, we have very strict standards. We also have a growing trail network. We have a bicycle and pedestrian plan, which is actually being updated this year. You can bike or walk from the southwest corner of our city, which is the golf course, all the way to the northeast corner of our city, Orchid Heights Park, while only crossing about 3 streets. So we're really proud of that, and that's all infrastructure that's been put in really in the last 10 years or so. So we have, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that we have a history of planning sustainable development, having a sustainable land use plan, but we didn't actually have a sustainability committee in the city until 2008. So right away, our sustainability committee had a lot of ideas about projects that they wanted to undertake, and they had a lot of enthusiasm and energy. And so we started knocking off projects like we wanted to have community gardens in the city. So we developed community gardens on city-owned land. We wanted to get more involved with education for students in our community, so we started doing outreach in our schools using volunteers. We started having monthly sustainability seminars that we held at Willie Street Co-op in Middleton. We also undertook the planning for a large reuse and recycling event that we called Clean and Green Middleton. It was held twice annually. We just had our last one in April because it's been so successful now. We had 13 events that we've opened a permanent recycling center in the city. It's one of only 2 indoor recycling facilities in the state. And it's basically a drop-off site for all sorts of items, anything from metals to clean wood to all the way down to like Tom's toothpaste tubes. We have a special container for Tom's products. We have a special container for Colgate products, Brita water filters, pure water filters. So we're trying to really offer a range of opportunities for our residents to be able to recycle. But what we didn't have, what our sustainability committee really wanted to have, was a systems approach to sustainability where we could actually measure, steps we're taking and have a plan for what our goals are in the city. So in 2009 and 2010, we worked with consultants from MSA Professional Services, GDS Associates, and 7th Generation Energy Systems to develop our sustainability plan, which was adopted in November of 2010. It includes 7 key categories of focus, water being one of them, as you can see on the screen. And right now, 5 years into the plan, we're working on updating the figures in the plan. Each of those 7 key categories of focus includes a vision statement, and these were developed through public input sessions that we held in the city, as well as a community-wide survey that we did where we got about a 2% response rate citywide. And this is the vision statement for water. You can see we want Middleton to have an abundance of clean water. We want public and private users to limit their use of groundwater, maximize infiltration of stormwater, and we want to keep harmful substances out of all water resources to ensure that development is not vulnerable to flooding. These are the water indicators from our sustainability plan. So if you go down to the 3rd item, the gallons of groundwater delivered to residential users per capita per year, you can see our goal is to decrease that by 10% by 2020. And you saw in Amy's presentation that the Madison Water Utility has a little bit more ambitious goal of 20% by 2020. We don't know how we're doing yet because, like I said, we're in the process right now of doing our 5-year update to see how we're doing for some of these indicators. But we have put some programs in place now that we're hoping we'll be able to see a reduction with. So in 2013, we had a water conservation challenge, and we rolled it out we opened it up to all households in the city. We got about 148 households to sign up. And essentially what they did is they allowed us to collect their 2012 water usage for the entire year, and then they competed against other households in the city to reduce their usage. And so of those 148 households, we saw a reduction of 26% from their baseline usage, but you'll notice the big asterisk there, and that's because 2012 was a drought year. So the baseline year that they were using to try to create a reduction from, it was probably a high watering year. So we can't really speak to how accurate that percentage reduction is, but it was really great for getting the word out to people. We had several seminars where we educated people on different innovative ways that they could save water in their homes. We had several businesses in Middleton that supported our efforts by donating prizes like Death Store Vodka and Capitol Brewery, Nature, A Clean, Home Cleaning, Willie Street Co-op, and others. In addition to having monthly prizes to keep people engaged, we also had an innovation prize, and that was given out at the end of the competition for the person that submitted the most innovative idea for how to reduce water. And the idea that was submitted to us is that discounts are given to those who purchase water in large volumes, such as bulk buying, which is that declining block rate structure that Amy was talking about. And unless we stop giving discounts to those who use water heavily, high volume users have no financial incentive to conserve water. So this brings us to 2014 when we found out that our water utility was going to be doing a Public Service Commission rate request increase. And that's when our committee sort of jumped on this as an opportunity to start implementing some of the goals that were listed in our plan. we got this data from the PSC to show our city council how City of Middleton residents were using water. And you can see in 2012, we were the third highest water user of the communities surveyed. And we really don't have large lawns in Middleton like they do in Wanakee and Westport, which were the highest water users. So we're like, there's some education that needs to be done. There are some steps that really need to be taken to address this. And we also saw this as an opportunity to help us meet our 10% goal. We saw that, you know, people were not using water efficiently in the city. So the Sustainability Committee that I staff made 5 recommendations to the Water Utility Board and the City Council. And the first was that the water utility bill monthly rather than quarterly. We felt that residents weren't getting an accurate price signal. You know, if they are only getting a bill once every 3 months, how are they going to use that information to change their behaviors? This one got the big red light because it cost more money. So our city council sort of took the tact that the bill is such a small amount every 3 months, and why would we want to break it up over 3 months? And is there really accurate data to show that this is going to reduce consumption? And ultimately did not approve that recommendation going forward in our water utility rate increase. The second recommendation was that the water utility go to an inclining block rate structure for residential. I have that one in yellow because our city council did support that. However, when it went to the Public Service Commission, they nixed it because we didn't have the monthly billing in place. And they have said that studies have shown that if you don't have monthly billing in place with an inclining block rate structure, you won't see the reduction in water usage that you would otherwise see because you're not sending a strong price signal to residents. So that's kind of our next goal. We're gearing up now, our committee, to try to take it back and get the monthly billing, get the smart meters in place, and go to an inclining block rate structure for residential. The third recommendation approved by both the City Council and the PSC was that the water utility bill multifamily as a separate fee category and that they be placed on a uniform rate structure. Previously, multifamily was on that declining block rate structure along with commercial and industrial. So, you know, as apartments used more water, they were getting a price break. The reason that we recommended uniform as opposed to inclining is because we don't know the number of units in every apartment and condominium project in the City of Middleton. So we would be penalizing the larger apartment complexes if we went to an inclining block rate structure. So we recommended uniform for that, and that got approved. We recommended that the utility put in place a rebate program for efficient toilets, and you have no idea how much headache this has caused us with our water utility because they think that this is just going to be a nightmare to administer, even though we've talked to 10 communities around the state who have said there are models in place and there are mechanisms for tracking it. So we're putting that in place right now. And we also recommended that the water utility put in place a water audit program for commercial customers. And that, in this case, does include multifamily. It includes hotels. It includes large manufacturing and industrial users. And then we also have a rebate program for smaller commercial customers. So our program is going to affect July 1. So that's what I've been working on, scrambling around, trying to figure out how we're going to market and send all this information out. And we're reaching out to plumbers right now to inform them of the new programs that are going to be in place. You can see that we have a $100 toilet rebate. We're trying to make it as simple as possible for people to take advantage of. We found throughout this process that we had a $56 plumbing permit that was required to replace a toilet, which we found to be an obstacle for a sustainability measure, even though most people weren't pulling them anyway. We couldn't find any evidence that anybody had pulled a toilet for pulled a permit for simply replacing a toilet. They were pulling them when they were doing like entire bathroom remodel projects. So we're waiving the fees. Our building inspection department wanted to keep that requirement in place. So we still require a toilet permit, but we've convinced them to waive the fees for that. For commercial properties, we have a 50% water audit reimbursement. So if there's anybody in this room that knows of consulting firms or companies that do water audits on a larger scale, I would love to hear that information because we're compiling a list right now of companies that do water audits, and we will be offering a 50% reimbursement of those costs to commercial commercial users. And then we have a $100 toilet rebate for commercial properties and also a $25 rebate for a pre-rinse spray valve in a commercial kitchen. And our budget for each program is $20,000 annually. And if you have any questions, you can contact me or you can ask them right now. And also I included our website, which isn't live yet because we've already had people bringing in receipts and trying to get reimbursements, and the programs don't go live until July 1st.